A little girl goes missing. Her parents are frantic. Fortunately, she left behind a clue. For months, she has been making drawings, and in the background of every single one is the same creepy headless figure. This sounds like some pretty standard creepy bullshit. No? Well, no. You are wrong. It is so much weirder than you think it's going to be in What the Hell Did I Just Read by David Wong, which is a pen name of Jason Pargin. So I loved this book. I've just finished reading it for the second time. It might be one of my favourite books of all time. But before I can explain what I liked about it, I need to be honest with you about something. I think we all need to be honest with ourselves about John Dies at the End, which is another book of the series. Now, before you get all mad at me, I am a John Dies at the End fan. I have 3 different editions of the book, including the ebook. I have read it several times. I have read the sequel at least 1.5 times. That's called This Book is Full of Spiders. Seriously, dude, don't touch it. I have seen and enjoyed the John Dies at the End movie. Most John Dies at the End fans don't necessarily like the movie, but I did. That could be the subject of a whole different video. And I even have the movie poster signed by the director and the author of the books. So I'm a John Dies at the End fan. This is coming from a place of love, but I think it's time to admit some of the things about the book that weren't that great. So for those of you who haven't read it, John Dies at the End is about a couple of slackers in their 20s named John and Dave. John doesn't die at the end, by the way. He actually dies somewhere in the middle. What a twist. But not for very long. I'm getting ahead of myself. So John and Dave take a drug at a party called soy sauce because it's this black liquid. And the soy sauce kills almost everyone who takes it. But to John and Dave, it gives them the ability, the unsettling, brain-damaging ability to see the hidden fabric of reality, including all the ghosts, ghouls, monsters, interdimensional demons, all the things that are usually attacking us from another realm, but which ordinary folk like you and me cannot perceive, right? So it's a series that messes quite a lot with perception. It's very funny and it's very scary, which is exactly what you want out of a comedy horror novel. But like I said, it's not perfect. There's the book was originally self-published online and as a series of different stories. So the book has been edited by the author and the publisher to try to make it into one cohesive story, but you can kind of still see the seams where they've plastered over bits and pieces to try to thread everything together. The other thing about it is that it's really offensive, and it's supposed to be in parts, but let me give you an example. This is a wildly experimental book, so a lot of debut novels are wildly experimental, particularly self-published ones, and mostly that's good. But for example, the monsters all talk like teenagers on Xbox Live, and so that exists as a kind of joke in the John Dies at the End universe, and it's funny, kind of, the disconnect between seeing the demons that talk like racist teenagers. And I mean, the demons are obviously evil. Racism is obviously evil. It makes sense that demons would be racist, but it's not something that you see in a lot of fiction, I guess, that I'm aware of. But for me, the shock factor of that, a lot of the stuff that's in this book is designed purely to be shocking. And sometimes the joy that you get out of the shock doesn't necessarily wash away the bad aftertaste of some of the jokes and some of the language that the demons and things use. So a very, very good book, but the reason that I wanted to criticize it is just to emphasize how much better this book is. What the Hell Did I Just Read by David Wong? So this is the 3rd one of the series, and by now, John and Dave are still slackers living in this dead-end town, still sometimes haunted by the after effects of the soy sauce, but they've been known as these kind of very low-rent Ghostbusters. People call them when there's something weird going on and they think there might be a supernatural element to it, including the police. So John and Dave get called into this kidnapping case, and the thing about... So the monster or monsters that are stealing the children have the ability to interfere with your perception. Like they can reach into your brain and tweak how you perceive your environment, and they can even mess with your memories, which makes them difficult to detect and even more difficult to outwit, which means John and Dave and their friend Amy, Dave's girlfriend, really have their hands full. But in addition to all of that, Dave is now suffering from depression. And this is where this book becomes something truly special, because literary fiction often explores depression and mental illness, right? For my next video, I'm going to be talking about Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, which also treads some of these same boards very capably. But it's rare, as far as I know, as far as I've experienced, for genre fiction, particularly comedy horror genre fiction, to explore mental illness with this much nuance. Because so Dave is suffering from depression. He's kind of in denial about it, or at least refuses to get it treated. But he's also literally fighting demon monster things that can interfere with your perception and your memories in exactly the same way that a mental illness does. So this book kind of explores the nexus between those two things in a really, really clever way. And it also explores, which a lot of these other, a lot of comparable books don't, what it's like to live with someone who has a mental illness. And in terms of horror novels, that's almost always like, oh, I'm The Shining, right? Like you're living with a crazy person who might murder you. This isn't that. This is a book that's incredibly honest about Amy's journey and what it's like for her trying to live with Dave, who refuses to get his depression treated. And just in case you're thinking that sounds like we're pushing away the comedy horror stuff, we absolutely are not. Like at one point, the demon that can mess with your perceptions turns up at Amy's house disguised as Dave and convinces her that he is Dave, but he's a happy version of Dave, a version without depression, who has decided to take his medication. And Amy's feelings about that and Dave's feelings about that when he finds out that it's happened after the fact are just... This is such a wise book. So it's not just scary and funny like the other ones were. It is wise and it is profound, and yeah, it still has some of David Wong's little quirks that your mileage may vary on. Jason Pargin, the author, was senior editor at cracked.com for a long time, so his head is just full of all these random facts and he can't seem to help himself but kind of sprinkle them into the book, which works sometimes, but other times, often you can kind of tell that they're just being dropped in because he learned them at Cracked rather than because they enhance the story in any particular way. And yeah, sometimes... Do you remember in my other video about A Familiar Sight by Brianna Labuscus, where I was complaining that the lines of dialogue had paragraphs of exposition jammed between them, so the rhythm of the conversation was broken? This book kind of has the opposite problem, where the author refuses to ever say what any character's body language was in between lines of dialogue. It's sometimes like reading a film script. But those kind of surface level flaws aside, the depth of this book is unfathomable. I really liked it. Look, I could talk for hours more about it. I'm sure as I stop recording, I'll think of something else that I wish I had said about how good it was. Let me just quickly say that this is some of the best use of unreliable narrator I've ever come across. Like, there's some from Dave's perspective, there's some from Amy's perspective, but there's also some from John's perspective, John being Dave's friend, and Dave explicitly tells you, look, all the stuff that John says, don't trust a word of it, because he always makes himself seem like an action hero when actually he isn't. So the unreliable narrator is used to create humor in a way that I thought was really very, very clever. But I highly recommend reading this book. You don't necessarily need to read the first two if you don't want to, but if you have the time, do. But if you don't, just read this one because it's terrific. And I'm thrilled to learn that there's a fourth book in the series coming. Usually I only read one book per author because I want to discover as many authors as I possibly can before I die. I will read every single thing that Jason Pargin or David Wong writes. This is just a wonderful series. So next, as I said, I'll be talking about Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, which is about a woman who is almost entirely the architect of her own problems, or is she, and is going through a kind of messy relationship breakdown with her terrible partner. Or is he terrible, or is she just perceiving it that way? It's going to be really interesting talking about this straight after talking about what the hell did I just read. So I hope you enjoy it. But in the meantime, it'll take me a while, by the way, because I have so many books to write. I don't have time to make a YouTube video every day anymore. But in the meantime, I have been Jack Heath, the author of Kill Your Brother and Kid President Totally Rules and Villain Kid Fully Busted, and I have another book about to come out called 10 Minutes of Danger. Plus, if you're in the United States, the Liars series is still coming out one book at a time. Stop talking, Jack. The video has already gone on for too long. People have tuned out. Remember to like and subscribe. Or don't, because surveillance capitalism should be banned, and frankly, yeah, you know, if you like and subscribe, the capitalists win. Don't do that under any circumstances. I'm going to stop the video now.